We've got the recount going on down in Florida and all of the issues involving corruption, laws not abided by, but only in 2 counties. And the 65 of 67 counties did this all right. We've got turmoil in the Democratic Party, and infighting already has broken out, and literally an attempt to prevent Nancy Pelosi from becoming Speaker, and literally the gender card now being played. Here to weigh in on all of this is former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. By the way, Brenda Snipes has now told the Miami Herald, the Broward County who's in charge of Broward County and all that has gone on, that in fact it might be time for her to move on. Jeb Bush has said she should be removed from office, and we've gone through the history of attacks here. When we even had Broward County ballots found in a Fort Lauderdale rent-a-car. That's how bad this is. And we've gone over the history of all of this. Joining us now, Mr. Speaker, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, and I do want to point out that this is a person who shouldn't just be removed from office, but she ought to be on trial. I mean, the number of laws she's broken, the number of court injunctions she's ignored, the whole procedure there. I refuse to believe if you find out that your local bank is short $3 million, that it's just an accounting error. I think it's much more likely to be theft.
Unless Mr. Potter stole it. Remember and It's a Wonderful Life? Yeah.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's exactly right. And so if you think about it, but if you watch what she has done over the years, and you watch this most recent example, no normal person could reach any conclusion except this is theft. This is a deliberate, willful attempt to steal a U.S. Senate seat and, if possible, steal a governorship. And it does far more damage. I mean, after all the left screaming about Russian collusion and all that stuff, the Democrats are doing much more damage to our process of free elections than Putin ever thought possible.
We have, 15,000 new ballots that just magically appeared in Palm Beach County. Almost 80,000 so-called uncounted votes turning up days and days and days after the elections. Now, Florida law is clear. It is unambiguous that the canvassing board shall report all early voting and all tabulated vote-by-mail results to the Department of State within 30 minutes after the polls close. And the canvassing board shall report, with the exception of provisional ballots, updated precinct election results to the department every 45 minutes. 65 counties abided by and complied with that law, except these 2. And, it appears when you look at everything that has gone on here, that it is, and then you look at the history of it, you can't help but think there's something drastically wrong year in and year out here. Why it is allowed to continue is even more shocking.
Well, of course there's something drastically wrong. These are people who do not believe that they can win an honest election. They do not believe they can win an election in only which legal Americans are allowed to vote. And so, as you know, in I think Broward County, they actually had the Democratic lawyers arguing that illegal immigrants should be allowed to vote and their votes should count. And so,
by the way, they did make that argument. They made that argument before a judge. They objected when a ballot was rejected because it was from a person that is not a legal resident.
Right. And that fits, of course, with what we're seeing across the whole country.
Mm-hmm. Here's what we now know. We know the track record here. We know that last week that Brenda Snipes, quote, accidentally, Mr. Speaker, mixed in rejected provisional ballots with hundreds of valid ballots. That means the entire vote now has been irreversibly corrupted. And in August of this past year, a judge ruled that Snipes systematically mishandled mail-in absentee ballots. In 2017, a judge ruled that she illegally destroyed ballots following a primary race. In 2016, Broward County election results were posted online before the polls even closed. And in 2012, 1,000 uncounted absentee ballots were mysteriously discovered in Broward County a week after the election. And then in 2004, Snipes simply just lost track of 6,000 absentee ballots. This is not a one-off, Mr. Speaker. Oh, all right, we apparently just lost the speaker. There is no question. You know, I just went through the history, 2004, 2012, 2016, 2017. In August, a judge ruled Snipes mishandled mail-in absentee ballots, and she accidentally mixed in this election rejected provisional ballots with several hundred valid votes, Mr. Speaker.
Right. Well, the point I want to make to people is this is not an accident. This is not some nice, pleasant person who, in between, baking cookies and serving apple cider, happened to have a boo-boo. There is a pattern in the Democratic Party, which, in my own lifetime, goes back at least to the 1960 election and the theft of Illinois and Texas by the Democrats. There's a continuing pattern that when things get close enough, if they think they can steal it, they will. That's what happened, frankly, to Senator Norm Coleman in Minnesota, where all of a sudden after the election, I think some 800 ballots showed up that didn't exist before the election. We've seen that happen again and again and again, and we're watching it play out right now in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Well, we know that, and by the way, it's not. We got some similar issues, not as profound in Florida. In Georgia, Gateway Pundit put out a report that the Georgia Democratic Party announced on Saturday. Now, the election was on Tuesday. That a handful of Georgia counties have suddenly now discovered thousands of new votes that needed to be counted. And the interesting part is the Democrats say, well, that new stash included absentee, early, and election day votes, but weren't counted. And guess what? They found 5,569 votes, of which 4,804 were for Stacey Abrams. Now, that's 85%. That's a pretty good voting margin because she wasn't winning Georgia by 85%.
No, but that's what you're seeing happen all around the country. I mean, what you have is a deliberate, systematic use of a variety of things like provisional ballots. The number of people who may not legally be Americans being allowed to vote under these provisional ballots, as you yourself pointed out, in Florida, it's just blatantly open, and there's just no question that there are specific people, and in fact, the Democratic Party lawyers were arguing for including people who are illegal immigrants as voters in an American election.
Unbelievable. I don't know how all of this is going to play out, but I'm very concerned. And I don't know how you go from a 57,000 vote margin lead, and every day it's another 10, another 10, another 10,000, 10,000, 10,000. I've never seen anything like this. It scares me. Let me ask you, and I'll get into this in more detail with Joe Concha later. So Jim Acosta's press credentials were removed. And, of course, the White House correspondent. There's a great piece in lawandcrime.com. It's a great website. And I read this, and they rightly point out in this piece that, in fact, it is false in what they're saying in the lawsuit. Acosta didn't just ask a question. How many times does the president have to say that's enough? And somebody to another reporter after he answered the question, and the president gets to say, you're too rude, you've been rude to my press secretary, that you can say, sorry, you're not meeting the protocol to be here in the respect this House deserves.
Look, I mean, this is a very important, I think, very useful debate for the American people. This handful of professional left-wing anti-Trump reporters don't have an automatic legal right to be in the White House. I mean, nobody ever said that Acosta somehow is superior to every other American citizen. If the average citizen went up to the White House tomorrow morning and said, "Hi, I'd like to go to the press conference," they'd laugh at him. They'd say, "You have no credentials. What's your guarantee?" And what you have now is that the elite media, the anti-Trump liberal media, has arrogated to itself a belief in its own importance, that it's somehow a legally entitled, special class, and that the President of the United States has no choices except to allow this special class, these privileged reporters, to do whatever they want to. I argued over a year ago, put them all out of the White House. Send them over to the office, the old executive office building. Send them anywhere. But don't treat them as though they are a privileged aristocracy of the media who are allowed to act like lords and ladies and be arrogant and ignorant and nasty, and we still have to call on them. And Acosta, of course, has worked overtime. I mean, look, this is a guy who was unknown before Donald Trump. He's desperately working to make his career as the Sam Donaldson of the Trump era. And so he's deliberately nasty, deliberately confrontational. I don't care who the president is, no president of the United States has to put up with that kind of abuse.
Let me move on. We have now 100 separate issues where Democrats, the things that they didn't tell us before the election, they want all investigations. It's like the Nancy Pelosi hate, destroy Trump Congress of this year. Now, by standards, this was a good election year, especially Obama loses 6 Senate seats and 63 House seats. Clinton lost 8 Senate seats, 54 House seats. I mean, Donald Trump gained 3 Senate seats. They don't have a big margin in the House, but there's a big fight. Nancy Pelosi, Elijah Cummings is trying to help her. She's now playing a bit. I think it would be ridiculous to win back the House with a pink wave, and you're not going to elect the leader who led the way. And so that's now the headline is in Politico, Pelosi warns against ousting a woman. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now protesting in Pelosi's office over things. What about all this infighting? This is going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Sure. People just need to remember that the great drama never quite ends. Now you're going to have, first of all, the biggest single loser election night was Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader in the Senate, who has now consistently been losing. And at some point, his conference is going to turn and bite him, and his activists are going to bite him because he's not getting anything done. He can't stop Trump's judges. He can't stop the tax cut. He can't stop the things that matter, and he's losing seats. And at some point, Schumer may be the biggest single loser. Second, Nancy Pelosi is going to have a significant minority in her party who want to work with the president. I think there are 16 Democrats who just got elected from districts that Trump carried. Well, they don't want to go into 2020 as anti-Trump Democrats. And so the pressure on them to find ways to work with the president. Remember, if Joe Manchin had not voted yes on Judge Kavanaugh, he would almost certainly have been wiped out. And so I think as you come into this next cycle, the pressure on her from both the right and the left is going to be amazing to watch. She's already the most unpopular politician in the country. And
I want to ask you one question about
it. Symbol of the Democratic Party.
I have one question, and when we get back, I want to ask you how Republicans need to deal with this. More with Newt Gingrich on the other side. As we roll along, Sean Hannity Show, 800-941-SEAN, our number as we continue with Newt Gingrich. We don't have a lot of time. How do Republicans deal with the fact that now they're revealing they want 100 investigations into Trump?
Oh, I think we make it very clear. Look, I lived through this, and frankly, we didn't handle it all that well. You were there at the time. And I think Clinton brilliantly played off our serious and legitimate efforts and got people to decide, do you want to have investigations or do you want to have progress? And ultimately the country decided they wanted to move forward. The Democrats are in real danger, I think. Let me say up front, as a person who believes in our Constitution, I think the legislative branch has a serious obligation to investigate where it thinks something is wrong. And I strongly support whether it's a Democratic Congress or a Republican Congress, they have every right to investigate. But if the country begins to figure out that this is just a witch hunt, that this is not serious, it's not about improving things, it's sort of gotcha, what will happen is it'll turn sour very fast. Now, not for the hardline left-wingers. They'll love it. They'll be thrilled by it. But the average the independents, the people who are going to make the decision in 2020, they're going to look up and say, boy, if the Democratic Party is purely destructive and purely negative, I don't think that's good for the future of America.
All right, Mr. Speaker, thank you for being with us.